Greetings, Collective Coven, and welcome to another episode of Archaeo-Astrology, a book-umentary series in which we explore the fundamental question of what was authentic astrology in its original cultural context. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Trey, aka Taboo Tarot Reader, author of Astrology for Divination and creator of the Archaeo-Astrology series. In this episode, we center the mystery of Sobekneferu, the first confirmed female pharaoh of the 12th dynasty of dynastic Egypt. The mystery of Sobekneferu has persisted despite the Patriarchy's attempt to erase her or to minimize her history, and also to smear campaign Sobekneferu as being responsible for the chaos and instability that followed in the 13th dynasty. However, is this a patriarchal gaslight? We know very little about her reign other than the monuments and temples that she left behind in her namesake, and the fact that she was connected through her bloodline to the cosmic cult of the crocodile star Draco, embodied in Egyptian lore as the deity Sobek. In this episode, we will deep dive into the Archaeo-Astronomy alignments of the temple Qasar Sagha connected to Sobekneferu, and the Archaeo-Astrology of the constellation Draco, and why it was so important to the elevated ancient ancestors who created astrology. Enjoy this excerpt via Megalithomania.co.uk.
Hey Megalithomaniacs, we are on our way to a site called Sagha, out in the Fayum Desert. I'm here with Andrew Collins, also Ahmed, who's from Soul of Egypt, and we're going to be investigating this. We're taking a whole series of four-wheel drive to this particular site. The reason we want to go here is because it's seriously megalithic, and it's kind of an anomalous site because there's surface luminescence dating that pushes the site back to possibly 3,500 to 3,700 BC, making it possibly one of the oldest megalithic sites here, definitely in Egypt.
Yeah, this incredible structure was discovered, or I should say rediscovered, in the mid-19th century by a German botanist by the name of George Schweinfurth. He was the first person to describe it. Then the famous British Egyptologist William Flinders Petrie came here towards the end of the 19th century, investigated it, wrote about it in his books, and what he said was that there were Old Kingdom pottery all around it, which suggested that it was of extreme antiquity. Later archaeologists have come here and looked at the interior design and thought maybe it's from the 12th dynasty, that's part of the Middle Kingdom, and in all honesty, it looks like it's a mishmash of both. I think that it was extremely ancient and it was reconstructed and redesigned in the 12th century. I found evidence here that it was associated with the female pharaoh Sobekneferu and her family, and that she was up here, and that's where we're going to try and find out exactly what was going on here, what was worshipped here. We suspect it was the god Sobek, Crocodile, but we're just going to see what else we can find when we get there. Now, there's a very strange legend connected with the Qasar temple. It's very old, and it goes like this: that one day there was a pharaoh, and he was being chased by big dogs, and they chased him all the way to the edge of the Fayum Lake, and he thought he was going to die. And at this point, a big crocodile rose out of the water and said, "Climb on my back and I will take you to safety." So the pharaoh got on the back of the crocodile, and the crocodile took him all the way across the lake to the other side, and obviously to safety. And in honour of this crocodile, the Pharaoh built him a temple, and that temple is Qasar Sagha. And what this does is bring together the elements of a Pharaoh, the crocodile god Sobek, and Qasar Sagha itself. And I find that very, very interesting, which tells us that this site unquestionably is going to be linked with that crocodile god Sobek. Welcome to the Qasar Sagha temple, this magnificent megalithic structure that is so mysterious that there's debate even to this day as to when this was created. Some people say that it was done during the Old Kingdom period, perhaps contemporary with the Valley Temple of Khafre at Giza. Others have linked it to the Assyrian at Abydos, but still others suggest that it was manufactured during the 12th dynasty and that it may have been connected with the family of Sobekneferu. And I personally have found inscriptions that were found here by earlier Egyptologists that have partial names of Sobekneferu in them. And I think that this was a temple of Sobek. It was used by her. I don't think it was constructed by her. I think that it was a very ancient structure, but that it was redesigned either during her reign or the reign of her brother Amenemhet IV, and that they redid the whole interior in a style very similar to what we saw at Medinet Mahdi. And that this tells us that this place was probably seen as a location of the ancestors. We know that there is Neolithic remains all around here. We know that the lake came all the way up to here. We know that there are very ancient legends associating it with a pharaoh and a crocodile. And this incredible landscape all around would have been seen as quite literally a physical representation of the other world, the Duat, the underworld of ancient Egyptian religion. And all of this combined together tells us that this is an incredibly special place that we are continuing to investigate now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Also here, look, you've got the remnants of a keystone cut, which is something you find all over Egypt and also all over the world, really. Very, very interesting. And look, this one here is fascinating. This particular stone, you can actually see inside where it was joined together. And you see there was no cement, nothing there, no mortar. And here as well. So you can actually see the edge of the stone. Very hard kind of type of sandstone. There's also 3 types of rock on the base. At the very base there's taffel, which is a local stone, which is like the whole stone you find all over the place. Then there's a layer of the sandstone and then the limestone. Looks like kind of all flat kind of blocks, but actually then you get ones like this. So it is polygonal, then you get nubs sticking out there. Absolutely incredible. What a place.
Very difficult, obviously, to say what the exact age of this place actually is. I mean, it's obvious that there are 12th dynasty links, but the style of the construction suggests something much, much earlier, going back to the Pyramid Age, 4th dynasty, or perhaps even to pre-dynastic times. I think it's been reconstructed. I think it was done in 2, perhaps even 3 different phases, and this is one of the most remarkable buildings in Egypt that I think was created in the past.
So one of the fascinating things about this particular site is the controversial dating that is associated with it. So research was done in the mid-2000s using surface luminescence dating, and this suggests, and the data they got was so incredible, because they did dating also in the Giza Plateau and some other areas of Egypt, and got dates maybe a couple of 100 years older. Much of this was published by Robert Temple, for instance, but here they found dates that go back 5,700 years ago, so around 3,700 BC. Minus or plus about 850 years. So this suggests this is pre-dynastic. This goes back at least several hundred years before the first dynasty and 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid and other such temples and sites were built. And so if that's the case, then the first phase of this could be the earliest megalithic structure in all of Egypt. Let's get in and have a look in here, because this is a fascinating little area I want to show you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we are here at the western end of the temple. Behind me is the 7 small cells or chapels that face towards the north. And at the end of these, you have this small little area, which is rectangular, but you can see right here that there is a hole. And this hole, as we will see, goes through to a blind room. So let's have a look, see what is in this room, if we can crawl through. Oh. Right. So what do we make of this? This is a room that is quite clearly blocked off. There is no obvious entrance into it other than what I've just come through. And why would you create this? Probably it was dedicated to some kind of hidden god, or goddess, of course, but their statue would probably have been in here, and I suspect that there would have been perhaps preparatory rituals that would go on here that were quite different to what was happening in the actual 7 cells or 7 chapels. And who might it have been dedicated to? Well, of course, it could always be Sobek, but I think the other possibility is that it could have been Amun, who was the hidden god. and that in theory his representation could easily have been within a place that was not accessible to the general public. Once again, you have all these incredible megalithic blocks, and I'm beginning to see evidence that this place was reconstructed. And I mean, look, you've got here, for instance, this wall here, and you know, things are out of place. I mean, why is the corner of that stone rounded, for instance? There's absolutely no need for that. The block on top seems to have been not designed specifically. When you look at the perfect nature of this polygonal wall here, it's completely out of place. This is something that I've been noticing as we've been going around the temple, that in my opinion, it's clearly reconstructed. I mean, some of it obviously shows evidence of movement, most obviously due to earthquakes, such as here. I mean, these blocks quite clearly are part of it, of the original construction. But on the other side, on the interior, I think that it's definitely been reconstructed. The other interesting fact is that you have here one of these blocks that goes around the corner. Yeah? Do we see these at the Valley Temple of Khafre? Well, obviously we see them in places like Peru, Machu Picchu, and obviously Cusco. And, you know, it's strange. I mean, why is there this similarity of architectural style in Egypt that you also have in Peru? Is it purely coincidence? Is it purely a case of independent invention? Or could there possibly have been some kind of cross-cultural contact via the Atlantic Ocean in the distant past? But I mean, look at this megalithic block here. This is extraordinary. I mean, in size, this must be, I'm going to use imperial, probably about 7 feet across by about 5 feet high, and it extends through this wall into the interior. And this is very, very typical of the size of the blocks that we find here. And this is so unusual for the 12th dynasty. And this tells me very clearly that there's a good chance that this is much older, probably Old Kingdom, or if the dating is correct, then it could even go back to pre-dynastic times.
You said it's getting some levels here.
Yeah.
So this is precision leveling, yeah?
Yeah.
So would this be like for all the different areas, like the different foundation levels?
The pyramids, for example, we find it in the lower courses and on the higher courses as well.
Okay.
So this is the accuracy of the pyramid builders, again.
Yes, according to what we have seen from unfinished work, all the work will be constructed with the natural rock formation face, and then it will be finished and flattened after it's constructed. That's the reason behind some of the work and the corners, not for this one specifically, because this one is intentionally on both sides. But if we walk this way a little bit, like you can see the interlocking methods. And we all know that this was to resist like earthquakes. But if we don't have earthquakes, what are we resisting? What kind of vibration? Sound, vibration? Sorry. Like these kind of curves, which we know it really well from the Valley Temple in Giza. The stone itself was, when it was constructed, it was to this height. And this amount of material was removed in order to flatten and finish the work. And we can still see how accurately it is interlocking. So this is not flat. If you look from here, the stone is going with a slope like this. It's not straight. No, it's coming with an angle. You can see it from here. And when we look outside, if you wouldn't mind taking a look outside. So if we looked here, for example, at the achievement on this side, you can see here clearly that this surface was not flattened. But what do we have here? We have similar scoop marks like the one we have in the unfinished obelisk, the patterns. And if you get further to the back, you will see it. Now we can clearly see some knobs here of unfinished work, and we can see also that this part here fell a little bit. So the interlocking of the stones prevented it from falling, but the stone itself was not strong enough. So you can see here that this block breaks, it's broken. So this was one block, these two pieces were one block. When the structure was falling to this side, the stones didn't dismantle, but it couldn't hold the weight, so it broke. That's how good this interlocking. And then we have all the scattered pieces of the same type of calcified sandstone in the surrounding, which shows that the structure was once a lot bigger. So all these pieces is nothing but more of this structure. Look, there are foundation pieces over there. So these here were once part of the building, and they also look severely eroded. Yeah, we can see here that this is not a natural formation. This was probably part of the foundation, and this was another block used to be constructed on top of. Look, again, the iron oxide, which is identical to what we're gonna see on the middle pyramid and on the Giza plateau. All these blocks over there is also parts from the same building, and we can see behind the jeep there is a foundation stone. So the structure was a lot bigger.
It's quite a way out.
Yeah. And then we are confused, of course, because we have the stone masonry identical to the pyramid builders. And because we did the pyramids to the Old Kingdom and to the First Dynasty, then we will assume that this was built also in the First Dynasty, even that we don't have any inscriptions. We have here artifacts that is scattered around from the prehistory time, from the Old Kingdom, from the Middle Kingdom, and all the way until today, crossing the Greco-Roman period and everything. Yes, it's a keystone. You know these. This is a keystone. You know, the rest of it will be on another block. We've seen those in the Osirian. And the archaeologists are seeing the similarities between the Valley Temple and Qasar Sagha and the Osirian. Even though we have other materials, here the stone looks like it was extracted from somewhere nearby, but it's the stone masonry with these interlocking, with these angles and the interlocking shapes. You cannot miss that. You can see the scoop marks around the knob.
Yeah. It's just like a Syria, isn't it?
Exactly. And then in and out, we can see how accurately this is leveled. So if we bring the scale once again, and we, for example, used it here. Okay. Will give us very similar to the results to the ones we see on the Giza plateau, which is usually somewhere around 0.5, just like what we are looking at. That's very leveled after thousands of years, after something shook this structure like that. You see the scoop marks up there?
So we come out behind the main part of the site here. And look, we've got all this lying around, this huge flat area here. And these look like foundation stones. This actually looks like this was part of another temple, part of another platform perhaps. It seems like we have the temple built over there, but actually over here, there could have been, the platform could have stretched all the way over here, right from the temple. And this could have been a whole ceremonial area. It could have been where people stayed when they were coming here to do rituals, because it's thought, a lot of people have suggested that Qasar Sagha is actually an outpost. It's like a megalithic outpost that's part of the lake. It's an astronomical temple. You have the sunrise and the sunset going always across the lake. You know, when it was in its original kind of placement in ancient times. But it's just all these blocks here just really fascinate me, because these are all the taffel blocks. It's a type of kind of tufa type stone, really. Softer, more breakable stone. But these are all shaped. These aren't kind of, they've been weathered, so they've lost some of their kind of pristineness. But look, you can see these are blocks. These have been shaped. This is not kind of random. So this could have been a huge platform. There could have even been another structure here, because we're finding quite large stones literally all over the place. Amazing weird features in here. Look at this, it's like a little room. It goes all the way down there. It goes to nowhere. Just there's a little hole that just kind of goes through to the kind of corridor entrance.
I think we have actually made an incredible discovery at this temple, one that I have never seen mentioned in any book or paper on this site. This is a petroglyph. And at first I looked at it, I was with Yusuf, and we looked at this and I said to him, what do you make? He said, well, it's not Arabic. And I suddenly realised what it is. There's the two horns of a creature, maybe a bovine, or it could even be a deer or something. There's the head, look, the very long head. There's the body, there's the four legs, and it's standing on ground. Here's the back of it. Here is the possibly either the legs or the tail coming down. That's the petroglyph. How old is that? I mean, this is an extraordinary discovery. I mean, clearly we can't tell its age, but I don't think that that's recent whatsoever. Right, we think we got another petroglyph here that our good friend Pamela Williams has just pointed out. Look. You can see here a very slim body of a person. Look, there's the stomach, there's the chest, but it's very slim, and there's the shoulders, there's the head going all the way up here, very long head with a headdress and arms reaching out towards the lake itself, which would have come right up to these shores in the past. That, to me, looks like the same style as many goddess statues that I've seen, particularly to do with Astarte in the Levant. Exactly that stance where you've got them like this, with their hands reaching out towards something. So to me, that's a representation of a goddess. Now, how old it is, we can't say. It could just be a couple of thousand years old. It may be 3,000 years old. We certainly know that there were Semitic peoples in this area, but this also resembles certain statues that I've seen of pre-dynastic goddesses as well. And to me, that's female. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but that looks female to me.
If you're still with me, dear viewer, thank you so much. Let's now dive deep into the Archaeo-Astronomy and Archaeo-Astrology of the cosmic cult of the Crocodile star as embodied in the ancient Egyptian deity Sobek. The mystery of Sobekneferu undoubtedly was connected to the constellation of Draco, a circumpolar constellation, which is the 8th largest constellation, occupying over 1,000 square degrees in the sky as it winds from the pointers of Ursa Minor nearly to Vega in Lyra. Why was Draco so important to so many ancient cultures in addition to the ancient Egyptians? The specific star Tuban in the Draco constellation was the true North Star before Polaris in our current era, from approximately 3,942 BCE to 1,793 BCE. Many ancient cultures observed the circumpolar stars to establish true north and navigation. The true North Star also changes across zodiacal eras during the precession of the equinoxes, and thus was a tool to track precession. Currently, in the age of Pisces, the true North Star is Polaris, but in past ages it was Tuban. For ancient cultures, these stars would have been meaningful in ways that our current time period would not find relevant. Hence, it's important to remember that in cosmology, the universe is in a constant state of change. Therefore, Sobekneferu, possibly by a karmic twist of fate, was living in a time of transition between the true North Star being Tuban in the constellation Draco and Polaris in the Little Dipper. Perhaps revolutionary radical figures like Sobekneferu come into prominence during these cosmic shifts. Was Sobekneferu an initiate into the matriarchal mystery schools stemming from Zep-Tepi the first time? Was Sobekneferu interested in the Fayum Lake region because the ancient Egyptians believed this was the mythical origin of their prehistoric ancestors during Zep-Tepi the first time? Let's now explore Andrew Collins' fantastic book, The First Female Pharaoh, Sobekneferu, Goddess of the Seven Stars. The First Female Pharaoh, Sobekneferu, Goddess of the Seven Stars, by Andrew Collins. Summary. Quote, Cleopatra, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, all of them are ancient Egyptian female rulers who rose above their predominantly patriarchal societies to become controllers of a great empire. Missing from this list, however, is Sobekneferu, ancient Egypt's first female ruler. Why was the reign of this powerful woman all but forgotten? Piecing together the lost history of the first female pharaoh, Andrew Collins presents the first comprehensive biography of Sobekneferu. Using every text and monument that concerns Sobekneferu and her time and power, he examines her achievements as ruler, the political and religious issues of her age, the temples and ruins associated with her, and her continuing impact on ancient Egypt after her reign. He explores her relationship with her brother Amenemhat IV, her sister Neferukta, and their father Amenemhat III, regarded as one of the most beloved pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom. He examines Sobekneferu's untimely end, the fate of her body, and the cult that developed in her name. Discussing Sobekneferu's magical beliefs and practices, Collins shows how they centered on the crocodile god Sobek, the hippopotamus goddess Tawaret, and Sekhmet, the goddess presiding over divine power. He reveals also how Sobekneferu's suspected pyramid was positioned to align with the setting of El Tanin, the brightest star in the constellation of Draco, seen in ancient Egypt as the celestial form of Sobek. Examining the modern-day resurrection of Sobekneferu among the occultists and mystics of Victorian London, Collins shows how she is the true inspiration behind every ancient Egyptian female queen who comes back to life after her tomb is found, as featured first in Bram Stoker's shocking 1903 novel, The Jewel of the Seven Stars, and later in several modern blockbuster movies. Revealing how Sobekneferu has left a lasting impact on culture and occulture through the ages despite being nearly erased from history, Collins shows how her continuing legacy is perhaps, ultimately, her true resurrection. End quote. There is little doubt that astrology was of utmost importance not only to Sobekneferu and the mystery school, perhaps, to which she was devoted, but to all of ancient Egyptian civilization. Why were Sobekneferu's power deities or totems the crocodile Sobek, the hippo Tawaret, and the warrior lioness Sekhmet? Perhaps because they represent cosmic archetypes that were mirrored in the cosmology and architecture of the ancient Egyptians. For example, the constellation Draco is home to the Cat's Eye Nebula. This feline feature is what is known as a planetary nebula, but the name is a little misleading because it has nothing to do with planets, and was probably named because those who first saw them thought they were looking at planets because many of these nebulas are round in shape, though others resemble butterflies, dumbbells, rings, and eyes, such as this one. A planetary nebula is the dusty shell of a dying, medium-sized star, which doesn't explode violently, but sheds its outer layers gently, not a bang, but a whimper. This creates a beautiful cocoon of dust around a dead star in the center. Our sun will eventually end its life in such a manner. This all begs the question as to why was Sobekneferu also devoted to Sekhmet, the warrior lioness archetype. Does it have anything to do with the fact that the constellation of Draco, which was connected to her namesake deity Sobek, features this Cat's Eye Nebula? What are the connections between cosmic archetypes to the matriarchal mystery schools of ancient Khemit? In my humble opinion, attempting to understand ancient Egyptian symbolism without the framework of astrology and astronomy is like attempting to interpret the Vedas without understanding Sanskrit. You can see here a reproduction of the astronomical ceiling in the tomb of Pharaoh Seti I, representing the circumpolar stars of Draco, Ursa Minor, and Ursa Major. This symbolically, according to Andrew Collins, represents the duat, or the place of the cosmic afterlife, which are detailed in the pyramid text at Saqqara. You can see that the hippo goddess is carrying Sobek on her back. She represents the great mother of time and goddess of the 7 stars. Note in the hair trailing from her headdress, 7 dots representing 7 stars. Now it's arguable which stars these represent. Obviously we could interpret the dual figures as the constellations Draco and Ursa Major and Minor. The total number of stars in the constellation of Draco can vary from 9 to 14 depending on the culture on which the representation is based. The constellation Draco has 7 stars that are less than 10 parsecs or 32 light years from the Sun, has 3 stars brighter than 3.00 magnitude, and 6 that are currently known to have planets. We could also, alternatively, interpret the 7 stars as the Pleiades in the constellation of Taurus, which were symbolized in ancient Egyptian cosmology as the 7 Hathors. Of course, we must always remember with ancient Egyptian symbolism that there are levels of implied multiple meanings which are symbolically representing different energetic aspects of the astronomical transits. So, regardless of which astrological interpretation resonates, the principle of correspondence still holds firm. Andrew Collins also suspects that the Great Mother of Time, the hippopotamus goddess of the 7 stars, could be alluding to the lore of the 7 Hathors. Ergo, if we interpret the 7 stars as symbolizing in one aspect the 7 Hathors, then this could be a subtle wink and nod to the Pleiades as embodied in the temple of Hathor at Dendera, which features the Dendera zodiac. This arguably was connecting Sobekneferu to the matriarchal mystery schools that studied sacred cosmology and cosmic cycles. It is also very interesting that there are 7 shrines perpendicular to the blind room, which Andrew Collins argues possibly housed a secret hidden deity at the temple of Qasar al-Sagha. If we know that Sobekneferu and the cult of Sobek were linked to this temple, then it makes sense that the hidden deity in the blind room potentially was the great mother goddess of the 7 stars, the hippo goddess Tawaret, or Sobek's mother, Neith. This conclusion makes logical sense, in my humble opinion, if we look again at the imagery of the symbolism in which the crocodile god Sobek is being supported on the back of the hippopotamus. In the natural world, hippopotamuses are capable of killing crocodiles, so the hippopotamus has the upper hand. Sobek offers his back to support humanity, and then the hippopotamus goddess offers her back to Sobek, implying a complex cosmic hierarchy of pattern, function, and interaction centering the great cosmic mother. This implies to us that in ancient Egyptian world view, the ultimate importance of the cosmic principle of the great mother, which had many aspects, yet they ultimately stemmed from the same absolute authority of Isis, hence why I suspect that Sobekneferu was an initiate of the mystery school of Isis, considering the Archaeo-Astronomy alignments at Qasar al-Sagha and her rumored pyramid. Stay tuned for the full deep dive. Now, with Neith being the mother of the crocodile Sobek and of the yin god Set, brother of Osiris, I repeat that it is highly likely that the hidden deity in the small blind room chamber was the matriarchal mother goddess, Neith, or Sobek's wife, the hippo goddess Tawaret, and not the patriarchal god Amun, considering there is so much evidence that the temple was constructed during matriarchal times. Therefore, if we interpret Sobekneferu as being the avatar of this ancient star cult, which initiated the draconian current to flow through the 13th dynasties that followed Sobekneferu's reign, in which she arguably conserved Egypt from colonizing, invading outside Semitic forces, which her brother was aligned with, then we can perhaps arrive at the conclusion that Sobekneferu didn't just all of a sudden one morning wake up and decide, you know what, I'm feeling really spiritual today and I'm just going to start my own religious cult. That way I can become the Pharaoh. That is not probably what happened. This is not religious delusion. It is highly likely that Sobekneferu was an initiate into the matriarchal mystery schools if the systems of spirituality that she embodied were rooted in astrology and astronomy. If you are still with me, dear viewer, thank you so much for being a deep diver. Your presence is truly appreciated on this channel. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Let's now level up, Buttercup, and read some excerpts from Andrew Collins' article, Sobekneferu's Legacy, the Sacred Places of Egypt's First Female Pharaoh. Quote, City of the Crocodiles. To better understand Sobekneferu's lasting legacy, we will need to examine monuments directly or indirectly associated with her, for those can provide certain clues regarding her actions in life. We go first to the El Fayum oasis, her seat of power around 80 kilometers, or 50 miles, south of Giza. Here, next to Birket Quran, the lake Maurice of antiquity, was the city of Shedet, called by the Greeks Crocodipolis, the city of crocodiles. Founded originally by the first king of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat I, it would later become the center for the worship of the crocodile god Sobek, during the reigns of Amenemhat III and his daughter Sobekneferu. This included a temple in which a live crocodile was worshipped as an incarnate form of the god. The Labyrinth. The site of Crocodipolis corresponds with what is today the city of Medinat El Fayum in the heart of the El Fayum oasis. 7 kilometers, or 4 miles, to the southeast is Hawara, the site of a pyramid complex built by Amenemhat III. Immediately to the south of the main pyramid, the king commissioned the construction of an enormous funerary monument named Amenemhat Ankh, the life of Amenemhat. Various inscriptions found at the site tell us that Sobekneferu added to the existing monument during her own reign. The Greek historian Herodotus, 484 to 425 BC, who visited Egypt around 455 BC, saw this vast complex for himself on a trip to Lake Maurice. He wrote that,
"No words can tell its wonders. Were all the Greeks had built it and wrought added together, the whole would be seen to be a matter of less labor and cost than was this labyrinth,"
adding that it had around 1,500 double sets of chambers, making 3,000 in total, and that beneath ground there were underground chambers
containing the burial vaults of the kings who first built this labyrinth, and those of the sacred crocodiles.
Via Histories 2, page 148. Sobekneferu is generally attributed to the Mazguna North Pyramid, while her brother Amenemhat IV is usually linked with the Mazguna South Pyramid. That said, no artifacts from their reigns have been found in direct connection with either pyramid, making these attributions tentative to say the least. The association with the reigns of both kings comes from structural similarities between the internal architecture of the Mazguna pyramids and that of Amenemhat III's pyramid at Hawara. They include the unique use of enormous quartzite blocks to create the monolithic sarcophagus chambers seen in all 3 of these pyramids. The Qasar al-Sagha Temple. I refer to the extraordinary megalithic temple of Qasar al-Sagha, meaning fortress of gold, situated above the former northern shoreline of the Lake Quran at the base of an east-west aligned hill ridge of the same name. This itself forms the southern extent of the Gebel Quatrani Formation, which caps the mountainous skyline to the north of the El Fayum Basin. During the 4th and 5th dynasties, circa 2613 to 2345 BC, black basalt from a quarry site named Widan el Faras on the top of the escarpment was used to create the paved floors of mortuary temples built next to various pyramids, including the Great Pyramid of Giza. Made of huge polygonal blocks of limestone, the interior of the Qasar al-Sagha temple has 7 chambers on its northern side, which link to a long offering hall that opens into 2 further chambers, one at each end. An isolated 10th chamber can only be accessed from above as it has no entrance doorway. Architecturally, the Qasar al-Sagha temple seems to resemble very similar megalithic structures seen at Giza to the north. These also employ the use of polygonal masonry. They include the Valley Temple of Khafre and the nearby Temple of the Sphinx. It is for this reason that early explorers who saw the Qasar al-Sagha temple thought it was constructed during the Old Kingdom period. However, its proximity to 12th and 13th dynasty settlements built on the lake's northern shoreline has now led to the conclusion that it was probably a temple of Sobek constructed during the reigns either of Sobekneferu or Amenemhat IV. Although a construction date during the reign of 12th dynasty king Senusret II has also been proposed. The temple's main axis may help throw more light on its construction. The structure's long axis, for instance, oriented approximately 20.3 degrees north of east, targets at a distance of 56 kilometers, or 35 miles, the Mazguna North Pyramid. This finding immediately links the 2 monuments with Sobekneferu, and therefore seems unlikely to be a coincidence. If we look now at the Qasar al-Sagha temple's short axis, which is approximately 20.3 degrees west of north, we find that it marks the setting around 1800 BC, the time frame of Sobekneferu, of the star El Tanin, which would have been seen to descend into the summit of the Gebel Quatrani Formation. So why might stellar alignments have been important to Egypt's first female ruler? It was the English scientist and astronomer Sir Joseph Norman Lockyer, 1836 to 1920, who first noted El-Tanin's importance in ancient Egyptian astronomy. In his book, The Dawn of Astronomy, 1894, he observed that several Egyptian temples were oriented towards the rising of the star El-Tanin. Lockyer suspected El-Tanin only became important in Egypt after axial precession, the slow wobble of the Earth across an approximately 26,000-year cycle, which caused the star to begin setting briefly before almost immediately rising again. Like modern scholars, Lockyer proposed that dynastic Egyptians saw Draco either as a hippopotamus or as a crocodile. El-Tanin formed some part of its head, most obviously an eye or an orange carbuncle placed in its forehead, which each night would dip beneath the horizon before rising again. Thus, the Qasar Sagha temple was aligned by its short axis with a bright orange star identified with the crocodile god Sobek. Interestingly, the coffin texts, which are spells and magic formulas found on burial coffins during Egypt's first intermediate period and afterwards during the Middle Kingdom, thus circa 2181 to 1650 BC, make reference to an influential star that might be El-Tanin. It is found in spell 148, which states,
"The crocodile star strikes. Isis breaks pregnant with the seed of Osiris, namely Horus."
Although other interpretations of the term Ki-Sid are possible, the likelihood is that during the age of Sobekneferu there was a belief in the existence of a single star representative of the powers of Sobek. And if this was the case, then there seems every reason to suspect this crocodile star was El-Tanin, its orange hue reflecting the fact that Sobek was associated with an otherworldly temple made of carnelian, with carnelian being a semi-precious stone, orange in color, that was of great importance in ancient Egyptian funerary rites. Interestingly, the only confirmed bust of Sobekneferu shows the queen wearing a pendant in the shape of a heart, which may be the same one shown around the neck of her father. These heart pendants were usually made of carnelian, a tentative link perhaps to Sobek's carnelian temple and El-Tanin's role as the crocodile star. The star's distinct orange appearance only adds to this conclusion. Aligning with the ancestors. The question remains as to why the Qasar Sagha temple was built in the architectural style of the Old Kingdom buildings, such as Giza's Valley Temple of Khafre. The answer must lie in the 12th dynasty's wish to connect its kings with the renowned pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom. For instance, Amenemhat I, the founder of the dynasty, attempted to legitimize his rule by linking himself with the ancestral memory of the kings of the Old Kingdom. Backing up this hypothesis is the fact that red granite blocks from Khafre's complex at Giza were sequestered for use in the construction of Amenemhat I's pyramid, at least for no good reason other than their spiritual efficacy. Further possible confirmation of this surmise comes from the fact that if the axial alignment between the Qasar Sagha temple and the Masguna North Pyramid is extended tangentially northwestwards, it targets the peaks both of the Red Pyramid of Dashur and distantly the Great Pyramid. This means that as viewed from the Masguna North Pyramid, the star El-Tanin would have been seen to set down to the peak of the Red Pyramid of Dashur, behind and beyond which would have been the Great Pyramid. Sobek, the creator. This synchronization both with Old Kingdom monuments and with the setting of the suspected crocodile star El-Tanin strongly suggests that the celestial influence of Sobek was important to the rulers of the 12th dynasty. At this time, Sobek was seen as a creator god, equal in importance with the sun god Ra. Sobek's acknowledged place of creation, as well as the point of renewal of the world each day, was the El Fayum oasis, the story as told in a Ptolemaic textual work known today as the Book of the Fayum. Not only does it show Sobek as a crocodile on the back of his wife, the hippopotamus goddess Tawaret, mimicking the sky figure represented by the stars of Draco, Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, but there is every reason to conclude that this important work derives from mythological themes originating in the El Fayum oasis as early as the 12th dynasty. Sobek, the crocodile god who sweated the Nile while creating the world. The crocodile star. Otherwise known as Gamma Draconis, El-Tanin is a giant orange star located in the head of the constellation of Draco, the monster Typhon of Greek astronomy. The name El Tanin derives from Arab star lore and is thought to refer to the asterism as a whole, with El Tanin in Aramaic and modern Hebrew meaning a sea monster, dragon, or crocodile. As we saw in part 1 of this feature, the ancient Egyptians saw the stars of Draco as a sky figure in the form of a hippopotamus, the goddess Tawaret or Reret, and or a crocodile, the god Sobek, both creatures often being combined into a single chimera-like hybrid. Sobek provided protection against the dangers of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians also sought the protection of Sobek against the dangers of the Nile, in particular crocodiles. Therefore, it is only natural that the cult centers of this god were established in areas infested with crocodiles. The best-known cult center of Sobek, however, was at Kom Ombo, where there was a temple dedicated to him and Horus. Although the two gods are said to be enemies in one myth, another belief states that Sobek was an aspect of Horus. This is due to the myth in which Horus turned into a crocodile so as to retrieve the body parts of Osiris that were thrown into the Nile. In yet another myth, Sobek is said to have aided Isis when she gave birth to Horus. So, if Sobekneferu's induction of the cult of Sobek into the pharaonic ceremonies and rituals had such a far-reaching effect on the countries and dynasties in Bible times, did it end with the fall of Jerusalem? No. The rituals were known and emulated by the royal houses in Europe, first with the name Pendragon, or Head Dragon, becoming known through Arthurian lore, and then with Emperor Sigismund von Luxembourg, King of Hungary, reforming the imperial and royal dragon court as the Societas Draconis in 1408. Emperor Sigismund claimed descent from Egyptian dragon dynasty of Sobekneferu through the Davidic line of Judah, and the Pictish line descended from Melasanu, or Melusine, and the Tuatha de Danann. One of the most famous members of the Societas Draconis is Vlad Basarab, or Dracula, son of Vlad Dracul. Dracula's son wrote that his father proudly claimed a linear descent of the priest of the dragon court of Queen Sobekneferu, by which he may have meant a spiritual priestly lineage rather than a genealogical one. Whether Emperor Sigismund was correct in his claims of descent from the various lines, many experts believe he forged his genealogy in order to build a power base amongst the other royal houses of Europe, or whether the son of the house of Dracul was misled in the mystical power he inherited through the initiation rituals. It is of interest that an almost unknown Egyptian queen who was nearly erased from all records has had such an influence on literature, beliefs, history, and culture, though the true nature of the original dragon court is still shrouded in mystery. What were the changes wrought by this merging of belief and politics? For starters, pharaohs were anointed with the sacred crocodile fat, messe, when they were crowned, referred to in Egypt as the Holy Mesa, which became the Aramaic mashi, which in its verb form is meshe, or to anoint. This led to the early kings being called dragons, mesas, or messiahs. This practice may have begun in Mesopotamia, but it was Sobekneferu who instituted it in Egypt, which was then adopted by the high kings of Israel and Judea. Jesus, as a Messiah, would have been anointed with the fat of the Messa with his priestess wife, as did his ancestors, which were of the Davidic line. The belief in the conception of a Messa without sexual union did not begin with Jesus, but with the goddess Isis, who conceived Horus with the aid of Sobek, who helped her retrieve her husband, though with one key body part missing. The Egyptians believed cosmic forces intervened in the impregnation under the patronage of the crocodile star. We find it in spell 148 of the Coven text.
In my humble opinion, there are striking patterns of similarity to the reigns of all of the female rulers of Egypt. Tune into the next episode for the full deep dive. What are the patterns? In my humble opinion, the main pattern of female pharaohs like Sobekneferu, Hatshepsut, arguably even Nefertiti, was that they were symbolically representing a return to a more ancient and more matriarchal spiritual system that we have interpreted as religion, because our modern patriarchal ego devalues astrology and doesn't understand that the whole hidden root of the matriarchal spiritual systems was astronomy and astrology. These patterns of similarity that we see, in my humble opinion, are implying to us that Sobekneferu, just like Hatshepsut, just like Nefertiti, Akhenaten, were initiates of the ancient matriarchal wisdom schools, such as the mystery school of Isis. And if we understand Sobekneferu's rise to power within this hidden shadow power dynamic, then we can perhaps understand the connections, because these are implying to us cosmic connections. This is talking to us about energetic phenomena, not just blind faith. However, we must always remember that the details we are working with have been filtered down through patriarchal deception, destruction, and obliteration of the evidence we are looking for. Therefore, the truth remains a mystery, and we are working with limited puzzle pieces. What is the modern patriarchal ego's blind spot regarding the significance of the Draco constellation to the elevated ancient ancestors? Draco was of utmost significance to the elevated ancient ancestors because it holds the ecliptic axis of the Earth. So what does this mean? This could be interpreted that Draco, in particular its eye star, El Tanin, is a fixed point around which the entire North Pole revolves around in a circular motion through the great precession of the equinox. On a deeper level, this could also imply that Draco represents a metaphysical space in the sky that never moves or changes. Draco is timeless. Archaeo-astronomer and author Graham Hancock calls Draco the heart of heaven. We can also observe a correspondence between the constellation Draco and the Serpent Mound effigy of indigenous Turtle Island. Serpent Mound is the world's largest surviving effigy mound, a mound in the shape of an animal from the prehistoric era. Located in southern Ohio, Serpent Mound is 411 meters long, or 1,348 feet long. Serpent Mound resembles a giant sinuous snake with a curled tail at the west end, a head at the east end, and 7 winding coils in between. The design of the mound also matches the shape of the constellation Draco, with the star Tuban, or Alpha Draconis, which served as the North Pole star from the 4th to 2nd millennium BC, lining up with the first curve in the snake's torso from the head. This alignment suggests another purpose for Serpent Mound, a kind of compass that helps determine true north. 2 more known mounds exist: Serpent Mound Park in Ontario, Canada, which has been closed since 2009, and Loughnell Serpent Mound in Scotland. Serpent Mound is the union of sky and ground, and surely was most likely built when Tuban in Draco was the true North Star. Why was Draco so important to the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Turtle Islanders? Is there a cosmological connection? if you can recall the legend of the Pharaoh at the Fayum oasis, climbing onto the back of Sobek, the crocodile god, there's a surprisingly similar archetypal story coming from Mayan calendar cosmology. In the sacred 260-day Solkin Mayan calendar, there are 20 day signs. Imix, or Imosh, is the day sign of the crocodile. In Mayan calendar astrology, mapping your inner cosmos, initiated Quiche daykeeper Kenneth Johnson writes about Imix, quote, Imix, the left hand. In ancient Mayan mythology, the tree at the center of the world grew from the back of an enormous caiman who slumbered in the depths of the primordial sea. This mythic figure, which appears so often in Mayan iconography, is sometimes called the earth monster. Imix is the day sign of that primal, preconscious beast, and therefore it is symbolic of the beginning of life and of existence. Since the earth caiman sleeps in the depths of the primal sea, this is also the day sign governing the sacred energy inherent in the ocean. Each of the four elements, fire, earth, air, and water, has at least one governing day sign, or nawal. The element of water has three. While Ish governs the fresh running water of streams, and Muluk is symbolic of the rain, it is Imix that rules over the world's great oceans. This watery day is an excellent time to pray for rain. Something rather uncommon in highly industrialized, technology-driven societies, but quite normal among the Maya, even today. The ocean is a universal symbol of the collective unconscious, or group mind that underlies all of humanity. Here, in the depths of the collective mind, lie the visions, the dreams, and the preconscious yearnings that underpin the lives of all of us. Imix symbolizes this aspect of the human mind, and this is why we call it the day sign of the left hand. As among many other traditional cultures, the Maya associate dreams and visions with the left side or feminine polarity, similar to the yin principle of Chinese philosophy, and the light of rational consciousness and ordinary reality with the right side or masculine polarity, similar to the yang principle. When we are deeply under the influence of this visionary, oceanic, preconscious side of human nature, we may seem to be at odds with all things reasonable. This is why this day sign is sometimes perceived as an embodiment of madness or lunacy. Imix represents that aspect of human nature that can be more than a little bit crazy. And yet it is only when we set aside the dictates of ordinary reality that we are able to lift the veil between the worlds and see into other realities. Some of these alternate dimensions may be treacherous and drive one mad. Others are sources of authentic wisdom. Ultimately, the right hand and the left hand were not designed to be at odds with each other, but to cooperate. End quote, Mayan Calendar Astrology by Kenneth Johnson. At the Temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, we also see the constellation Draco encoded in the structure itself. Also note how Angkor corresponds likely with the I-star El Tanin. Graham Hancock and Santafia's beautifully produced 1998 book, Heaven's Mirror, they reported the discovery of then 25-year-old research assistant John Grigsby, who suggested that just as Robert Bauval had discovered that the Giza pyramids mirrored the belt of Orion, so too did at least 15 of the main pyramid temples of Angkor Wat form a model of the sinuous coils of the northern constellation of Draco, as it appeared in 10,500 BCE. The mythical first time, or Zep Tepi, of the ancient Egyptians. Is this cosmic correspondence a coincidence?
My search begins in Cambodia, 1,000 miles south of Japan. On the 21st of March and the 21st of September, when night and day are of equal length, Angkor lights up like a fairy tale kingdom. This mysterious Southeast Asian civilization has unexplained similarities to the civilizations of ancient Egypt and ancient Mexico. All three of these supposedly unconnected civilizations used pyramids in their sacred architecture. the religion of all three focused on a quest for the immortality of the human soul. Is it a coincidence that poisonous snakes were sacred here, just as they were in ancient Egypt? All three regions were believed by their inhabitants to contain a hidden image of the heavens.
Let's jump to Angkor in Cambodia. Turns out that from Giza to Angkor is exactly 72 degrees of longitude. Weird, that. Another one of those precessional numbers. And makes me think of a whole worldwide project establishing sacred sites at certain positions of longitude around the globe and creating them for a very specific reason. And I think Angkor and Giza are intimately connected, although they seem to stem from very different periods of history. Angkor what? By the way, Angkor means life to the Horus in the ancient Egyptian language. That's another one of those coincidences, according to the scholars. But here's the Angkor Wat temple. Look at this amazing axis running all the way through it. Actually, it just disappears. We're slightly off the screen here, but it disappears right over the horizon, miles and miles away. It's an east-west axis. Rather pyramidal form of all of the temples in Angkor. And here's what happens on the spring equinox at Angkor. Stand on that causeway, look at the central tower, stand in the middle, and you'll see that it starts to rise, and then it slowly slides up the tower, nears the top of the tower, and then, bingo. The whole place just lights up like a fairy tale kingdom. It's an amazing experience, and you suddenly realize that this monument, this temple, was built to connect sky and ground at that moment, at that exact moment. It comes alive. That's what it's all about. It's an equinoctial marker, just like the Great Sphinx. There are 72 major temples at Angkor. There are curious pyramidal hills in the background at Angkor. There are these amazing structures. This bridge over to Angkor Thom, 54 figures on each side of the bridge, another precessional number. 54 plus 54 equals 108. 108 is 72 plus half of 72, 36. The churning of the Milky Ocean, a relief at Angkor. That's the same thing that's represented in sculpture here. It's represented in a relief here. You see the serpent Vazuki, gods on one side, demons on the other. Actually, these are the demons. These are the gods. They're pulling on Vazuki, the serpent, like he's some huge piece of rope. He's wrapped around Mount Mandara, and it's a churning process. They're whipping up the Milky Ocean, and they're churning Amrita, the elixir of immortality, the very same gift that is sought by the ancient Egyptians. That's what's produced by this churning of the Milky Ocean. If you trace the major temples of Angkor, you find that they too represent a constellation on the ground, and that is the constellation of Draco in the northern sky. And to cut a long story short, the only time that the correlation works perfectly is in 10,500 BC, exactly the same time that the correlation at Giza works perfectly. I'm not saying the temples of Angkor were built in 10,500 BC, they certainly weren't. They date from about 1100 AD, but archaeologists are finding that there's layers and layers of construction underneath the temples that we see today, as though they're reincarnations of earlier temples. So we have enigmatic ancient sites and religious ideas widely distributed around the world, extraordinary similarities pointing back to a remote date 12,000 years ago. We've got ancient maps that seem to document the meltdown of the last ice age. Are we looking at the traces of a forgotten episode in human history? I think so. I think that's what's going on here. And because we've forgotten it, because we are a species with amnesia, because we are so much a mystery to ourselves, perhaps it's because of that we're so lost and so troubled today, so haunted by sense of something missing, something that we need to know about ourselves. For the ancient Egyptians, the essential mystery of human existence concerned our spiritual essence, that we are participating in this theater of experience that we call life and the world in an immense endeavor aimed at the perfection of the soul. That's what we're here to do. Virtually identical ideas were explored at Angkor.
If you're interested to learn more about the complex precessional astronomy encoded in Angkor Wat, linking it to the Giza Plateau, you can check out my book-umentary, Archaeo-Astrology, Decolonize Your Horoscope. Now, we could do a whole book-umentary about Angkor Wat. I've had the great personal privilege to visit this magical temple, which has equinox and solstice alignments like many structures created by the elevated ancient ancestors celebrating the marriage of sky and ground. Famously, the rising sun during spring and fall equinox can be seen ascending directly over the tallest middle spire of the Angkor Wat main temple. In my humble opinion, it is not a coincidence, therefore, that we find an implied connection between Angkor Wat and the Black Khmer civilization and the Black African civilization of ancient Khemit, ancient Egypt, ancient Nubia. The very name Angkor Wat is arguably a derivation of the Egyptian name for the Eye of Horus. It is very intriguing that the indigenous people of Southeast Asia are black. They are called negritos by Western science, a derogatory term that translates from the Spanish as little black. The faces on the temples of Angkor Wat are clearly black. A lot of people don't even know that there are black people indigenous to Southeast Asia because there is a unconscious or conscious intention by the current power structures to obscure the fact that the Khmer civilization, who likely built Angkor Wat, was a black civilization, the same way that the truth about ancient Egypt has been obscured by colonial Egyptology, being descended from prehistoric black African ancestors from the sub-Saharan regions, and even during dynastic times being a predominantly black African civilization, which was repeatedly invaded and colonized by later outside peoples who were not from the region. This is very important to remember when visiting ancient sacred sites, and often goes undiscussed. So I feel very compelled to offer a mindful reminder that during these vast cycles of time, human populations tend to shift and change in ways that we are not even conscious of unless you get a genetic DNA test. Therefore, we as modern humans, when we visit a different country to go commune with a sacred site, often perceive the significance of that site through our own modern cultural context, power dynamics, and unconscious biases. It is often assumed that in modern times, the current dominant culture or dominant ethnic group in the region where these sacred sites are the same people as the elevated ancient ancestors who manifested the sacred structures. In my humble opinion, this is generally not the case. In my humble opinion, the pattern is generally that in modern times, the groups of human beings who most likely are descended from the elevated ancient ancestors who manifested these sacred sites are unfortunately often the most marginalized ethnicities in all modern human cultures. So who would that be? That would be the indigenous peoples. For example, the majority of Arab Egyptians are not the same
people as the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids. Therefore, if there are multiple implied connections, when we look at the Temple of Angkor Wat through the focal point or lens of Archaeo-Astronomy and Archaeo-Astrology, the connections between the ancient Khemer civilization and the ancient Egyptian civilization are self-evident.
Now we continue. Now we're going through the cosmology. There is Tauret, the hippo, the crocodile on our back. At the axis is an astronomical ceiling. This is the axis of the universe. Tauret represents becoming, pregnancy, gestation, birth. This crocodile, for obvious reasons, represents death. So here you have wedded together the central principle of life in the universe, anywhere. And the word here, we'll go through a little bit more of this as we go along. The animals are chosen by the Egyptians very carefully because they embody, they're not worshipping animals as the academics would have. The animals embody, are the best example of the embodiment of what you should embody a certain principle in. So the hippo represents pregnancy and gestation, because what could be more pregnant than a pregnant hippo? And also because it's the only animal, the only land animal that gives birth to its young in the water, and life springs from the primeval waters. Even in today's evolutionary theory, they talk about the prebiotic soup, which Campbell's used to produce in the very old days. Now, more cosmology. This is Nut, the sky, who in Egypt is feminine, and Geb, the earth, underneath, who is masculine, often shown with an enormous phallus. So this may be one of the expressions of the fall of man, and I'm not being casual there, actually. But it's very peculiar. It works both ways. We used to talking about Mother Earth, but it's equally valid to talk about the sky as the matrix of all. Actually, it's probably more accurate, and the inseminating agency as masculine. Anyway, that's how the Egyptians did it. This is a ceiling, and this is off one of the papyruses. Now, further down in the cosmology, this is processional. The ram of Amun. Amun takes over as the chief deity or the chief principle of Egypt. Remember, I didn't say this. As soon as you call the gods, it sounds superstitious. If you think of them as cosmic or organic principles, suddenly it throws the whole discussion into another category. So Amun becomes, around 2000 BC, the chief principle or guiding religious principle of Egypt, and his symbol, one of his two symbols, is the ram. He's referred to as the great ram in the sky. Well, that matches almost exactly the ingress into Aries, and the great ram in the sky almost screams out procession to you. And we continue. Now we're into some of the gods and the goddesses themselves and why they're chosen for their role. This is Sekhmet, who is the consort of Ptah. Ptah is the architect of heaven and earth, and he's always shown in mummy wrappings with only his hands free, clutching the emblems of power. It is Sekhmet, his consort, who does all of the work, and she is the lioness. She's also the goddess of vengeance, or associated with vengeance, retribution, war, etc., and healing, but healing by fire. And she's a lioness because, again, in real life, the lion, the male lion, has a good time of it. He just sits there doing nothing. He doesn't do any of the hunting. His basic job is to keep the other males off the ladies, And the female does all of the work and all of the nurture and all of everything that has to be done. So the Egyptians were quite wise. That's how it should be done. And see, if I had longer now, I'd tell a whole bunch of jokes about this sort of subject. But we don't have long enough. Okay, now here's Hathor with her cows, with the strange triangular face, which was very un-Egyptian, and her cow's ears, a strange headdress, and column going down here. This is one of the most interesting symbols of Egypt, and interestingly enough, a couple of women on successive trips a few years ago solved the problem of that face of Hathor's, and I won't go into it's a fairly long story, and I don't want to get into it, but in a nutshell, Hathor is also the only one of the gods and goddesses who has a whole column to herself. None of the other gods is there a column. Everything is lotus and papyrus, for symbolic reasons. But to cut it short, Hathor is one of the expressions of the cosmic feminine. Her name actually means Hathor, means the mother of Horus. And this was solved, what that face was, the relationship to the cow was solved by a couple of women on my trip, as I said. One of them looked at his face, and I talked about Dendera, which is where the New Year was born. It was celebrated in Egypt, so it's the birth of the New Year, and by extension, the birth of the cosmos, celebrated at Dendera. And earlier on, again, another woman on my trip said, well, John, the place is as dark and as not oppressive, but it's a very dark place. And she said, because it's the womb of time. It's meant to be dark. And then on another trip, years later, I was talking about this story, but still this mystery of this weird face. And she said, well, John, look at the shape of it. It's the shape of a uterus, and those are the fallopian tubes. And I said, right.
You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here. Kneel.
How dare you use the voice on me?